Hello, Tony. Welcome to the podcast. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you.
Excellent. Well, I'm super happy you're here because when we first started talking, you really turned out that one of your areas of expertise, not the only, but is this whole concept that I hadn't really heard of, and frankly, I've had some weird thoughts about before. So I want to dig into that. But before we get into what that topic is and what we're going to talk about it, would you mind for the podcast listeners just giving a quick, like, 1 minute overview of kind of who you are and what you do?
Absolutely. So, Toni Thomas, Regional Director of Challenger Gray and Christmas, which is an outplacement firm that helps HR and their departed employees. It's a severance paid um, benefit that the company pays for their departed employees with job coaching, resume writing, and coaching, so they are able to move forward and land in that new role and have support and move on in their careers into something new. So I'm really passionate about helping both sides. I think it's one of the toughest times in someone's life. So having Challenger as your outplacement partner really it does make a difference for the both sides, the company's company side and maintaining their culture, and then on the departed employee side, having them move forward. This they've done nothing wrong other than they're moving on from them, which is hard.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so this is this idea or concept called offboarding. Is that
Yes.
a term you coined, or is that sort of the industry accepted term for it?
The industry, you think about it, there's two parts to a onboarding process, and then they have an offboarding process. So when you're onboarded, you know, it's clear what's going to happen, right? They put a
Mm-hmm.
lot of preparation, a lot of time into that. But when you're offboarded, whether it be, voluntary, involuntary, you know, that piece of it is offboarding with really empathy and a plan. And when you offer outplacement along with the offboarding, and it's more than just getting your computer back and cutting access. It really is. This is a human being behind the process.
Mm-hmm.
So,
So
mhm.
you say it's more than cutting off computer access, but in a lot of companies, I feel like I've definitely heard. I was fortunate in that I was, well, I guess technically I was downsized out of one, but it was all very amicable. But I've definitely heard stories of people getting downsized, let go, and literally like a security guard comes to the table, you pack up your
Yeah.
things, they walk you to the door, and that's we wash our hands of this. Um, so that's sort of, I mean, I'm not in the industry as much as you, but to me that feels more the norm than the type of sort of co-beneficial relationship that you're talking about.
Well, yeah, it doesn't have to be the norm, right? Meaning it doesn't. I mean, this is someone's brother, sister, mother, cousin. It's a human being that, you know, I've been on site with offboarding. I've been actually, as the riff happens and they're saying they're being laid off, I'm in a room next door waiting for them to come in to answer questions about the program that their company purchased for them. And a lot of times they're in shock. And on top of that, there's so much shame attached to it. And they just want to get out of the building. And I get that. It's a lot to process emotionally. But there is this ripple effect that happens from the departed employee to the remaining employees and the stakeholders at the company as well. The
Mm-hmm.
ripple effect, when it's not done with best practices in mind, it can really send a ripple effect and some damage, to all those people I just talked about. So having, a process and having, compassion and empathy lead with this and a plan, right? You have a plan for them,
Mm-hmm.
you know,
And
we are
so,
separating, but we took care of you.
and I mean, I obviously am biased and totally agree with you. But let's talk about that ripple effect a little bit because I am of the I agree with you in all the things in the human side. Like, oh, it's a person, they have feelings, they have a relationship, they have a life. But sadly, whether it's cynical or not, so many decisions in the business level, at the leadership level, are made sort of for lack of a better term, independent of the human cost, I guess. It's like, yeah, it sucks for them, but yeah, whoa, look at the numbers. Uh, but with this ripple effect, it's not just this is the right thing to do from a humanity standpoint. There's, I mean, you can drill down to a cost even So could you talk a little
Hmm.
more about what some of those ripple effects are and how they impact the organization?
Yeah. So, the ripple effect is your people are still your people. So when you lay someone off and there's not that best practice involved in offering, you know, decent severance, outplacement, all those extra things that you can, if you can offer, and why that the ripple effects matters is because they're going to be your billboard on the way out. A year from now, they might be working for as a vendor and with your company, and they're like, "Nope, we're not doing business with them." I had a not a hor- I had a horrible experience. I mean, it
Mm-hmm.
really can affect the business, not just at that moment, but in the future, right? I always say what I'm in is risk management. You're
Mm-hmm.
managing the risk for the company and the individual. So, the individual feels two things. They're going to feel, obviously, most people end up feeling their sadness and shock, but they're either going to say, you know what, I don't like what happened, but they took care of me, or
Mm-hmm.
they did me dirty. And doing someone dirty, meaning that they did not, it was just an exit. I got my box. They're going to ship my stuff. I didn't get to say my goodbyes. I didn't get a wrap up email to my coworkers. I didn't get a chance to, you know, to say those things. So that leaves someone feeling very angry down the road because they weren't able to get those messages out. And now the remaining employees, we were walking partners. Now we're
Mm-hmm.
not. And now I'm worried. Should I, my morale, I'm going to get more work usually loaded on me. And now, should I get my resume together? The people staying also are so concerned because now they have a higher workload. Their productivity usually goes down the tank because there's so many emotions they're trying to process.
Mm-hmm.
And they just lost their close friend that they've known for the past how many years, you
Yeah,
know?
it's funny. This is sort of related, but just top of my mind is I don't know if you're a radio listener, but here in Philadelphia, the number one morning show is a show called Preston and Steve, and it's been around. I stopped listening, just morning routine, blah blah blah. But I listened for a long time, loved it. My good friend is on there a lot, and it was this team of like 6 people, and one of them is a woman named Kathy, and she was part of the team from the very beginning. And just recently in the news came out this like she was just suddenly let go, and they were very sad and talking about it. But reading the social media commentary on there, um, I mean, people are just number one, they're lambasting the other hosts, which they shouldn't do because it wasn't the host decision, but that's a perception issue, right? Regardless of why you do it. But people really are bashing the parent company because they're like, no, this is the numbers decision. I can't believe it did it. So like you said, the reputation and the word of mouth is just terrible for them.
Yeah, because I mean, I saw a little bit of this in the news, and I do try to follow those subjects when they come up. I think when you give someone the proper farewell
Mm-hmm.
and you're able to give someone like, we took care of her, I don't know if they offered outplacement. It's not
Well,
it,
it didn't
it's
sound like it
not
because I
I'm
remember
aware.
reading that in the interview she said wherever I end up. So it sounds like they didn't really make sure she landed on her feet. They're just like, well, you'll be fine.
And don't you like when all that is cut off and your access is cut off, you return the computer, that individual is at home, and
Mm-hmm.
who's helping them navigate this? And a lot of times, if they don't have outplacement, they're by themselves trying to figure it out. And I mean, I'm not a resume writer. I would need a resume writer to write the resume. That's what we do.
Mm-hmm.
I would need help in my branding. That's what we do. All those things that would need help in interviewing. You know, you need help on, making sure when you're ready to interview, what's your, 30-second commercial about yourself. What are you doing for your time that, since you've been in between this transition? There's a lot of moving parts to being in transition, and having a company, a team be by your side is so important because if you don't, you're by yourself and it's very lonely. And I just had a call with an HR leader who doesn't have any support. She didn't get outplacement, and she's now wondering, I got to get to work part-time somewhere because I need to bring some money in, and I'm feeling really discouraged, and my confidence is gone. My confidence is
Yeah.
gone.
Well, it's funny. Sometimes you think about these stories, and at my stage in life, most of the
Mm,
people I know are married. You know, generally, not always. Both spouses working. So you think about wow, one person gets laid off and it sucks, and now we got to tighten our belts and whatnot. But like in your situation, if you are the breadwinner in your family, or if you're
Yeah,
you're alone, you're solo, like it's not just oh this sucks. It's like wow, just getting food on the table and paying the mortgage becomes a huge stress factor.
it does. And the longer it typically goes, they start talking about in days when they've been laid off,
Mm-hmm.
then they go into weeks, and now they're into months. And the longer it goes, there's a stickiness. There's a stickiness for them. There's this heaviness for them. And they get frustrated. And they're, a lot of times that's why you need a coach. You need someone to help you. You need someone to
Yeah.
be that sounding board to, when you do get the interview, you nail it. And when you're networking, you're really being very specific on how people can help you, really knowing your ask and being prepared. So, um, not an easy time. And what looks out there right now in the market is with the tariffs and different things that are going on in our supply
Mm-hmm.
chain, there's a lot of talented people out there. And I think there's shame attached to what happened.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes people feel it's something that they did, and a lot of times it's not. It's
Yeah, I
not
mean,
what they did.
like
It's the company,
the
right?
company, the numbers. Sometimes it's a down year, and sometimes it's just the numbers people are like, oh, we could increase our profits by 5% if we remove this position, and then that yeah. But like to your point, um, it is not their fault, and you kind of went through a bunch of things there, and I wanted to follow up on a number of them. Uh, so So first, there. Well, let me ask this question. This is almost a little promo. I know you're with Challenger Gray, and this is what you do. One of the services you offer for companies is helping with offboarding. That's from the company side. Is this something you or the company offer for the individual? Let's say, like you said, that HR leaders like we don't offer offboarding or severance or anything like that. Is there a service? Is it something you offer, or is there a service for people who need help with that?
So we only can work with companies that
Mm-hmm.
they're the ones that buy our services. But I do, recommend if you've been, in a layoff and I do think having a career coach, there's a lot of them out there.
Mm-hmm.
Interviewing them, asking for recommendations is definitely important. And if you're in HR and you've been laid off, ask for outplacement, right? Like,
Yeah.
I have a lot of HR leaders that will go and say, is it possible? I'd like to use Challenger. Here's the programs. Can I get, I'd like to get a program. Really feel it's going to be beneficial. And by the way, when they land and they're off unemployment, the company saves money. By offering
Mm-hmm.
outplacement, you're less likely to get litigated. Like there's a lot of really good things, not only just for the person, but for the company, like when you do the right thing. So if you are part of a layoff and you haven't, had the exposure of having outplacement paid for, I definitely think in talking and interviewing career transition coaches is and hiring one yourself. I mean, it the days can get crazy, and having an accountability partner, I think, is really key.
Well, let's talk about the organization. Here's a question that's been on my mind for a while. And I know you connect a lot with HR professionals, and it's kind of your entry point. That's who you deal with mostly with working. But that's you. If your business is like mine, that's usually not the person who has the final say. So to me, it feels like it would be a hard sell because obviously the HR person, they care about the human factor, they see the benefit, but sometimes you go higher up, there's a person, if they're not already on board, convincing them to put all this money in an employer you're letting go, like, well, what's the ROI? So how do you make that sale? How do you convince that leader of the ROI?
Yeah, so typically HR is the one that will help influence this, and sometimes it's their decision, right? Sometimes it's the CFO and the CEO, and sometimes it's all three working together.
Mm-hmm.
I feel that we're partners on this. And when you come with a thought in mind about what will this accomplish, so it's going to accomplish, obviously, hopefully not get litigated because litigation can be very costly. If you let someone go and they end up getting an attorney, and it can be very costly. So from the litigation side, that's one piece.
Well, let me
The
pause right
second
there and let's ask a quick question about that. So you're reducing litigation. You think the litigation would be reduced because the employee would be like less vindictive and they'd be like, oh, they helped me. They didn't just leave me out in the cold. Um, and
Because their
that's
company offered a program to help them,
got it. Okay.
right?
Makes total
So
sense. Yeah.
yeah. So, and then the second is that branding, and that branding piece is, future branding and current state branding. So when you offer outplacement and you took care of my people, the people I worked with,
Mm-hmm.
they're texting, what do they do for you? What do they give you? Are you good? And then they talk to us. We enroll them in the program. They have their resume redone. They're, being coached on how to network. They're getting their LinkedIn refreshed. They have all this support, unlimited support with coaches, and putting themselves, plan to get out there, strategy,
Mm-hmm.
and having that. They're like, oh, they really were taken care of. And then they see they landed. And they're like, well, working with us, Challenger, typically the ratio of landings is under 3 months,
Wow.
using our services. Yeah. So again, when you have the help, you have the coaches, you have limited access. We have a technology tool called Challenger Essential, which is such a cool tool. It writes your thank you notes and cover letters. There is so much administration work to be done when you're looking for a job,
Mm-hmm.
that part of our tool does many different things, but that's some of the things it can do to save time. Um, and then when you land, you're off the unemployment, you're off their any medical benefits you might have been on. So it's really the ROI. I love talking about ROI. The ROI is there, right? And I usually go over those results with my HR leaders after once a program has been kicked off and people are enrolling. And I have a report I go through every 6 months. I can show them where people have landed, and I explain, who engaged, who didn't. Um,
Mm-hmm.
it's important data points because there is an ROI to this.
Yeah. And so that's like almost a tangible ROI, and then there's the intangible ROI of, like you said, the reputation, because a person lands. Number one, they're going to be, I think you called it at some point, an ambassador, right? They become,
Mm-hmm.
for whether someone's looking for a job or someone's looking to do business, or I mean, there's always that very nice situation where that person lands with a supplier or a potential customer, and all of a sudden, if you've got a good relationship, it can lead to business or discounts
Yes,
or better relationship, and if not, it can like be like losing business even.
absolutely. And I've seen that unfold live. I have definitely seen it unfold. It's
It's
like having a breakup and it didn't go well.
well, it's true, and these are things that people forget about. Or like, oh, it's never going to happen, but it does, especially when you think about depending on the position. Some industries are so like I don't know what the word is, but insular or small. Like if you leave
Mm-hmm.
one place, there's a number of places you land at, and it's very possible you're going to want to do business with that company, and if there's people are there. And how does this all? It's a site I've never had to use because haven't worked a whole lot for other people. But do
Mm-hmm.
you see any impact with like Glassdoor and people leaving and stuff like that?
Yes. Oh, Glassdoor. We have a quote out there about Taylor Meadows, who's on Glassdoor. I believe that's the name. We'll have to double check that. But we have it on one of our flyers. But it really talked about, why offboarding is more important than onboarding, because what people are going to write on Glassdoor and how that you made them feel
Mm-hmm.
really does impact. And then the current employees that are staying feel that they know those were taken care of. They'll take care of me too
Right.
if I should happen to exit, right? Because there's always that shakiness once the first wave happens of a layoff, and then people are wondering, am I safe? Will they take care of me?
Mm-hmm.
Then they start asking their friends. They see 2 weeks in, 3 weeks in, and oh, they already have their resume done. Oh, their LinkedIn profile looks great. Like they now feel better because they know that their friend was taken care of. And then when they land, they're less worried because they were taken care of.
Right. So the huge weight off their mind, they can just focus on their work, which is productivity.
Yes.
And the Gallup poll, which we as speakers love the Gallup because they come out with these great but I spoke to an HR group in April, and literally that morning I had an email from Gallup about like the latest employee engagement, and it's like 69% of the workforce is disengaged, and 19% of that is actively disengaged. So these are the people who are like looking, and I can only imagine that like if I was at a company and someone was laid off out of nowhere, kicked to the curb, not helped, like I could see me feeling disengaged, and I could also see me starting to look like preemptively, like, oh, if they did that
Yeah.
to so and so, like I should get out of here before they do it to me.
It's natural, right? Don't you think that's a natural feeling to feel that?
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, I'm kind of lazy, so I probably would think about doing it, but I think a lot of people are much more proactive and actually do it, which brings this idea of kind of how people leave. And you mentioned this phrase that last impressions matter more than first, and then I was going through some of your material, and you had mentioned ideas I think I'd seen before, and as a speaker I've heard this, but I never really thought about it in terms of employment and offboarding. But the peak end rule, could you kind of explain what that is and kind of how that relates to offboarding?
Definitely. The peak end rule is really interesting about how our brains work. They'll remember the highest moment and the lowest moment. So the peak end of like when it was the greatest and when it was the worst.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what people's brains tend to remember. So they're going to remember a great moment and they're going to go right to what went bad. And I had my transitions group today and someone was speaking at it and she named the exact day, exact time her layoff happened 6 months ago. It's that moment is in her brain
Mm-hmm.
because it was a really, highest and lowest moment of her life. So it's what our brains tend to go to. It's
Yeah, and I
just
think that
natural.
the third thing I add to that is the recency bias, which is our brains also remember the most recent experience we had with something.
Mhm.
And if your most recent experience is being let go, which for most people who don't have an offboarding program, it's not a happy memory. So you're going to leave, and
Mm-mm.
most of your memories and associations are going to be negative around the organization.
And then when you start to interview, how will that sound when you're interviewing? Like you having that story tightened up and really modified. So they're, it's like asking when you're dating about like, oh, how you broke up, how long
Mm-hmm.
ago was, you're trying to figure out, is the person healed from it? You're trying to figure this out in the dating scene. Same
Mm-hmm.
thing when you're hiring, you're trying to see that they work through their issues. Where are they with it? And
Mm-hmm.
having a coach to help you talk about that is going to be really important.
Yeah, absolutely. And what I want to talk about is some. You mentioned you were just talking about your HR group, your
Hmm.
transition group. So I want to kind of shift a little bit, because so
Yep.
far we've been talking about the benefits of offboarding, and I know I have a lot of HR audiences, so hopefully there's a bunch of HR people listening and kind of maybe haven't thought of this before. And if this is something you'd like to explore more, we're gonna have Toni's contact info in the notes, so reach out to her and then see how. And I assume before I get into my other question, since I've shifted into mini promo mode here, uh, I assume, especially for smaller businesses, that their first thought about this is going to be like, "Oh, we can't afford that." And I'm sure everything is different, but is that true? Is it like even small for a smaller mid-size, like we've only got 100 employees, like we can't afford this. It's not something we can look into.
you know, no one ever comes to me with a big budget, typically. Like, let's be clear.
Mm-hmm.
So, we do have, products that are definitely affordable. They might be more virtual, but nothing is like, done to a video and you're going to be watching content video and they're on their own.
Yeah.
These are with a live human being, a coach. It might be virtual through Zoom, but they will have access and get support. So there's programs that are, you know, um, at that level. And then of course, we have up to C-suite programs, which, are a lot more extensive and customized. So I think when you look at the cost of, and we only invoice for those that engage in the program. So 20% typically when you are offering outplacement,
Oh.
20% will not engage. So I think it's important to know, am I going to be invoiced for everybody? And what does that look like? So not why they want nothing to do with the company. They
Yeah.
found a job. They might, be retiring. And even though we can help with retirement, they don't want any help. They
Yeah.
they literally don't want any help. So we do not invoice for them. Only if they meet a coach and get a new resume is when my company will invoice. So that does matter.
Yeah.
You're not paying for everyone,
Right.
right?
Right. It's not
Um,
just like a retainer. We're just going to keep paying this money and never actually use a service. It's pretty much only paying for when it's used, which is
exactly. And then I go through the report to go through everyone 6 to 8 months out, to see, the ROI of it. You landed and all that is important. I'd want to know how my money was spent. Those details are definitely key factors on moving forward, right? With our,
yeah.
you know, uh, if we have another impact in the next year or so.
Yeah, and then they can kind of decide how it's working. And all right, so
Yeah.
that's great. And so if you are an HR leader or executive listening to this, and you're like, oh, I want to explore more,
Mhm.
definitely reach out to Toni, find out more. So now I want to shift a little bit from the organizational side to the individual side, which I hadn't really planned on doing, but you can roll with it here. it's well, you mentioned this transition group, and this is one of the first ways we met is we talked, and then you had me come and present for your. So you actually run a breakfast meeting usually, right?
Yeah.
For people, mostly HR leaders in transition, which is a great service, by the way, just kind of being very helpful. And so, what are you seeing, kind of like for a person? Let's just say there's an individual listening, and they're either going through, they've been laid off, or they're out of work right now, or what do you find are the kind of the differentiators between the people that sort of deal with that well or get through it okay, and the ones who really struggle in that period of transition?
You know, I think it's definitely is different for everybody. I think meaning like we're all at different points, whether, they're the sole provider or maybe I've met some people that they have the luxury of not being worried because they're going to want to do their next chapter, but money and finances aren't the biggest stress for them because
Mm-hmm.
that's just the way their life is set up. So I think, but part of it also too is ego. So ego, our ego says sometimes our confidence is based on our title and how much we bring in. And for a lot of people, when the longer you're in transition, that stickiness comes in, your confidence goes, and then you're feeling like you're showing up and you're frustrated before the even hello goes out where I meet them, and I'm checking in because I know that they feel they hit the wall. I don't know if you've ever ran a marathon. I've only run one, but the wall is a real thing.
Mm-hmm.
And for those in transition, they hit some walls. It can feel isolated. It feels like, well, so and so got hired. What's wrong with me? Why didn't I get hired? And there's a lot of comparisons. Not that you're not happy for somebody because you are, but there's also like, what's wrong with me?
Yeah.
Why didn't I get chosen? So I think that's a big piece as well. And, the other piece is, um, you know, you're doing all the right things, you're networking, you're applying, and then, you know, some people think it's easier than it's going to be. Looking for a job is a job.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like business development in a way, right? Because you're doing networking, you're sending emails, you're being thoughtful on your companies you're interested in, you're asking how I can help you. This isn't like a one way of I just need help. The best networkers, the best people, and I said to the call right before you, I said to her, are you asking that question to people you're not working with, how you can help them? Because the
Mm.
more you are of service to someone else, the better you're going to feel.
Yeah. And I love that. And this obviously I'm biased because this is like the ultimate like yes and yes but type approach. It's like the
Right?
yes but what you can do for me versus yes and what can I do for you. So how would you respond? And maybe you don't have an answer. I'm putting you on the spot. Um, to a person who's like, well, like I'm in transition. I don't have a job. I can't offer anything to anyone, right? I would feel like that's going to be a mindset some people have when they're meeting new people. Um, Now I know you're shaking your head and you can't see if you're just listening. Like you disagree with me, but you disagree with the sentiment. Do you disagree that people have that feeling? Like, well, I'm like,
Yes, they have that feeling. And it's the perspective of
mm,
what you actually can do because you have a network.
mm-hmm,
You know people. You can introduce people. So you say to someone, I don't know if there's anything before the call wraps up. Is there anything I can do for you, personally or professionally? Or I had an HR leader uh, meet with someone that she wanted to meet this one company. I gave her the introduction. They met, and the woman was like, "Well, I'm actually looking for a mentor," because she was more senior, would you be open to mentoring me? Isn't that interesting that she's trying to help her within the organization and other opportunities?
Hmm.
And then the person in transition is able to help as well. And they have now monthly, meetings where they connect and they talk about, she mentors her. So everyone has a network, whether it's from their internal company, it could be from their kids or friends. We all have a networking can happen anywhere. Pickleball court can happen at the local pub. It doesn't have to be so traditional on LinkedIn and so formal, like is your company hiring? That's to me is not networking. Networking is getting to know the person. How can I help you? Tell me exactly like if there's companies or introductions I can do. Once I get to know, like, and trust you,
Hmm.
I most likely may open my best network to you. If I don't get to know, like, and trust you, and you show up late, your camera's not on, you're not organized, you never even look to see what I did, how can I put you onto my best network? So networking is really like a job interview.
Yeah, and what I like about
Very like a job interview.
yeah, and it's interesting. It's funny. A quick note is one of my good friends, another speaker. I may have mentioned him to you, Michael Goldberg. His whole
Oh yeah,
topic
yeah.
is, do you know Michael or
I know. We haven't met, but I know him.
yeah?
Yeah.
So, and I think when I spoke for your group, I think I brought his book. I think I pointed him out. But his definition, and he talks on networking. He's like one of the biggest networking speakers in the world, and his definition is very similar to what you said. He's like, it's just meeting and connecting with people to find out how you can help them. Like that's what networking is, and it's such a nice, simple, like outward focusing of definition. And as someone, I think we've talked about this. I'm much more introverted and shy. Like I don't like I find it uncomfortable, and I'm trying to get better about it. But one of the things I found is from the selfish standpoint is yes, I'm always trying to think about how I can help the other person. But what I've tried to do is instead of putting the pressure on myself of like, all right, can this turn into business? Can I one, how can I help them helps? The other thing I find is I just want to find people I like to talk to,
Mm.
irrespective of the business. So, if I connect with someone and we start talking about, it's happened to me once at a conference I was speaking at, and at like the networking happy hour, which usually I hate. I just ended up by chance bringing up something that I like fantasy novels, and the guy was talking, and we just talked for like 20 minutes about fantasy novels, and it didn't turn into business, but it almost did. Like he had a potential. Now, even if it didn't, though, so for me, the yes and I tell myself is like, look, try to help them, and don't worry so much about who they can connect you and can they hire you. Just like, do you enjoy talking to them, and then talk to them again, like set up a time to connect again, and so on.
Exactly. Well, that's the relationship. You now grew from transactional where it's like, well, I need your help. I'm in, who can they introduce me to that is going to be hiring that can, it's about getting to know the person.
Mm-hmm.
This is a person. And not every conversation is going to be a 10 out of 10. I've had some calls last 7 minutes because it just was like, we didn't really have much together. There's no like chemistry. There was no,
Yeah, and it is very much like dating. It's like you meet a bunch of people, and some you have a nice experience with, but you're never gonna really talk to again. Others you hit it off, and maybe someone goes somewhere, and others are like in 5 minutes, you're like, all right, this is not what I thought it was gonna be, and that's and I think and I think to your point about like when you're in transition and you use the term a couple times like the stickiness, it's like every conversation you have that doesn't turn into a home run just feels like a failure as opposed to like just part of the process. So, do you have any kind of tips for managing that? Because I think the emotion's a huge piece of it when we're in transition.
it is. I say this all the time. Never so high, never so low. Just let it be. Like you get tied up on this conversation's going to go great. This person's so senior and you have so much expectation and then they don't show up for the call or they only give you 12 minutes and you're like, oh, I had such hope for this one.
Mm-hmm.
Versus going in, c'est la vie, it is what it is, doing your research, doing your homework, right? Being prepared before the call so you come really thoughtful and you have your questions you want to ask. Um, and then not be attached to the outcome. Like, and whatever you promise them, you make sure you follow through.
Well, yeah.
Make sure you follow through and you do a thank you note. Thank
Mm-hmm.
them for their time. You know, if the conversation's going really well, hey, why don't we schedule time? Maybe in 8 weeks we can just do a 15-minute call to check in. Schedule that way you have them on the phone or on the Zoom or the Teams. Like
Mm-hmm.
you like someone and there was a connection, like get another one because you might be hiring them in 2 years. Like you don't know.
Yeah.
Like you're building your network and it isn't a one-time conversation. That's not networking. Now, it is networking when you realize that may not be your person. Other people, I've had clients come to me through my network. My network didn't necessarily need me, but their friend in HR did have a layoff and they said you got to talk to Toni. And that's how I've gotten business by being referred in. No differently when you're looking for a job. You're being referred in. You get bubbled up.
Hmm.
You um, may hear something before anything goes live. You're building a connection, a common thread. Um, you're having an interest in somebody. This is you're building that relationship. It's very clear. And if there's no relationship, that's okay. You're not, and not everyone's going to be your. I knew from the first 5 minutes of talking to you when I met you over a year and a half ago, I liked you, and I'm like, I want him on my network,
Well, thank you. I felt the
right?
same way, which is why we've
I,
continued to talk.
Correct. So, if someone says, well, what did you think? What do you think I'm going to say? 10 out of
Hmm.
10. Great guy. I bought his book for everybody. Great message. It was so great seeing my transition folks laugh because a lot
Hmm.
of times I'm seeing heaviness and sadness and fear. So
Hmm.
you brought in something, I could see you adding value to a company that needs leadership training or bringing that in. I mean, I was like watching and I was like, wow, when their heads were going back, they were stomping their hands, like very engaging, right? So
Hmm.
I'm just going to give you a shameless plug now
Well,
too.
I appreciate
Um,
that. That's
so
networking.
it, yeah, I mean, I was like, I won't forget that day.
Hmm.
Again, it's a high moment. Peak
Yeah,
and
well,
roll.
that's the thing with humor and laugh. You try to give them the peak so they makes the message memorable. So thank you for that. I really appreciate it. And glad everyone. I was happy to help. Like I said, they're transition people. I was happy to help because I haven't been there per se, but I've been very similar places of like with my business. Just it's just a down period,
Yeah.
and I had the exact same feelings you're having. But from a solopreneur standpoint of like all those leads you think are going to convert and they all don't, and then you're looking at your calendars empty, and then you look on social media and all these other people like, oh, I just spoke to this group. It's that same kind of feeling. So helping out with that is happy. I was very happy to do it. So all right, great. So I'm trying to think here. I think we're kind of coming up towards the end of our time, and I did want to. I'm gonna ask you one kind of final question before we wrap up, but um, I had one question about the transition people, which I'm sort of forgetting for the moment because I got very distracted by all the other things you were gonna say. Oh, it was more of a comment, more of a thought I had for my own life. I look back on my life 15 years ago
Mhm.
when I was kind of first starting out in business, and I didn't have kids. I wasn't even married, wasn't dating yet, and I think back to the amount of free time I had and how much I squandered it, mostly because I was feeling emotionally down because my business was new and not successful, and I was single and not happy about it. So instead of being like, oh my God, I have 16 hours of waking time a day to do
Right.
absolutely anything I want, no boss, no job, no girlfriend, no kids, and I just like watch TV and surf the internet just because I felt emotionally down. Now it's different, and some of the transition people will have, family and things, but like, how is there a way to kind of remind people to make the most of that time? Like you have all this time, and there's going to be a point in your life where you are so busy with work and life that you look back on that transition couple of months and being like, oh, I should have really taken advantage of that.
Yeah, and usually what happens when they get the offer and they accept, and then they have 2 or 3 weeks, sometimes a month before they start, then they're
Mm-hmm.
like, they're pushing everything in to clean that closet out, to get that room painted, because now they feel they can because the heaviness is off, right?
Mm-hmm.
Heaviness is off my shoulders because I'm landing. I'm no longer going to be in transition. So now I'm going
Mm-hmm.
to get done some of those projects. I do believe the most important thing to really do when you are in transition is keep to a schedule. So the night
Mm-hmm.
before, what's your next day look like? Where are conversations? If you don't have, because things, it's like the ocean, the tide goes out, the tide goes in, like it, so things open up and you have all these interviews, and then in 2 weeks they're all gone because
Mm-hmm.
they either filled it, they're put it on hold, or you weren't the candidate. So then you got to go in, you got to hunt new, no different than business development, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you got to get back out and have these new conversations. So keeping that evolution and feeding it and keeping to a schedule and truly having like your people. Like my transition folks, man, they text me, they call me, they schedule time together. I'm there to help support them, but I'm not the only one. They have other people in their life that are their tribe, you know,
Yeah.
their board of directors, whatever you want to call it, that are there for them.
Yeah,
And that they're going to support you, they're going to believe in you. So when you're down, typically we're both not going to be down on the same day.
yeah, it's funny. It's this one thing I learned in improv comedy, which I talk about in some of my programs, but not as much. And I actually think it's arguably the most important thing. It just doesn't quite fit into the programs as well and what the client wants. But I have this phrase I use called emotion drives content, which is how you
Mm,
feel is going to determine what you think, which then determines what you do and say.
yeah.
And I think that's the secret sauce. And to your point, like when we're feeling down, when we have that stickiness, it's so important. Like the schedule, the routine helps us feel less down. The support, the people we can reach out to, whether it's a former relationship through a challenge or great thing, or just through your transition group, or through friends, colleagues. And I think we forget that when we feel down. It's like you get so. I would encourage, kind of like to your point, like anything you need to do to rejuvenate, to connect, to feel
Mm-hmm.
better. Um, because I think when we feel down, we feel it's an indulgence, like we don't deserve it. That kind of comes back to the ego thing.
Yeah.
Uh, but it's the thing that's going to kind of get you back up and going.
Self-care. Self-care is number one.
Mm-hmm.
Go for a walk, schedule the walk, literally schedule it, put it on like, I got to go for a walk. You know, walk for half an hour, 20 minutes. You're not going to miss out on a job. I can tell you that.
Yeah.
Like grounding yourself in that self-care and then having the right people around you. And it's right. I mean, you will output what you think. So
Mm-hmm.
movement is just huge when you're in transition because a lot of times they're physically stuck. They feel like nobody wants them. They've applied.
Mm-hmm.
They
And
they
physically,
aren't
right? They're
moving.
like stuck in the house all day. They don't leave the
Yeah,
house because
like
they're just.
yes, yes. So it's how to get unstuck. How to get unstuck in a really in a time that, you know, my I was in third grade when my dad was laid off and I didn't understand it. I was like, "What are you doing home so early? It's 8 a.m. Like you
Mm-hmm.
should be at work." And he said those words to me. I was laid off. I'm like, I don't know what that means. Like, you're not going back? Like, why do you look so sad? Like,
Mm-hmm.
so layoff just doesn't happen to the individual. That's that ripple effect we
Yeah.
started with. Happens to the family. It happens to the, you know, the employees that are staying. It happens to the stakeholder. It happens to everybody that was involved with this person that they're now like, you know, this was someone's father. This was
Yeah.
someone's husband. It's
Yeah, and that's
definitely,
it's
yeah.
just clearly, like you said, you have a passion for this, and it's very clear. And I guess that's one of the places it stems from. So yeah,
Mm-hmm.
it's great to see. So
Right?
kind of, you said we've circled back, and what I love about I think the organizations that do believe in offboarding and working with a company like yours, or at least trying to do the best they can to do right by their people. To me, that's like a yes and organization, right? They're just like, let's build a yes and culture. Let's try to help people even on their way out. So for again, going back to people listening, HR leaders, executives, anyone who is interested in learning more about you and Challenger Gray and how they can maybe start adding offboarding, what is and we'll put it in the show notes, but what's the best way for people to connect with you?
By email or phone. Happy to share a checklist with them that we put together at Challenger as well. I can share that. Um,
What
you
is
know,
that
I'm
checklist?
it's for offboarding, but it's a checklist for offboarding. If they have an offboarding coming up and they're like, it's a checklist that Challenger created, so I
Oh,
can
great.
share that with them.
Mm-hmm.
Again, connecting. Even if there isn't something going on, it's good to meet new people.
Okay. Yeah, and I believe
Why not?
last time we talked, you were I'm like, oh, who I kind of had that question you asked, like, who can I connect you with? And your basic response was just cool HR people. Like, just that's all I want to do. I just want to meet cool HR people. And so, yeah, if you're a cool HR person, also just connect with connect with Toni. Um, fantastic. Well, we're gonna wrap up here. I do want to ask you one more question. I
Okay.
try to end all of my podcast interviews this way. I talk about the idea of saying yes and instead of yes but because I have an honest belief that if everyone started with a default mindset of yes and, it would just make the world a better place. We'd be better connectors, more positive, more collaborative. So what's one small thing that you believe if everyone did better, it would make the world a better place?
I believe if everyone is open to meeting new people.
Hmm.
You don't know what battle that they're fighting and how you can make a difference. It doesn't have to, and it could be a small act of kindness that you did for them,
Mm-hmm.
right? It doesn't have to be necessarily, uh, you know, big and bold. These subtle things you can do for each other, and these acts of kindness is truly usually free. So I think if we all show up each other, meet new people, get to know each other, make the world a better place.
I love it. Well, that is great and a great note to end on. So, Toni, thank you so much. This was fantastic. And if you're listening, be sure to check out Toni and Challenger Gray and learn more about what they do. It can really make a huge difference. Thanks, Toni.
Thank you.